Her brother was dying. Serafina gambled everything, only to be cornered, exposed, and facing a brutal end. Then he stepped out of the shadows, a silent predator, his obsidian eyes claiming her. He wasn't just another player, he was the city's ruthless Mafia king, and she had just become his captive. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to Serafina like a shroud, suffocating her more effectively than any physical restraint. It permeated her clothes, her hair, even the very air she breathed, a constant, cruel reminder of where she spent her days and why. Luca. Her brother's name was a raw, bleeding wound in her soul, a silent scream that echoed in every beat of her desperate heart. He lay in a bed just 2 floors above, fragile and fading, his small, brilliant mind clouded by a rare, aggressive autoimmune disease that devoured hope as relentlessly as it devoured his body. Each day brought a new diagnosis, a new experimental treatment, and with it, another mountain of bills that mocked her dwindling bank account. Serafina ran a trembling hand through her disheveled brown hair, ignoring the dull ache behind her eyes, a constant companion of sleepless nights. She was a ghost of her former self, the mathematics prodigy whose future had once glittered with endless possibilities. Now her life was reduced to algorithms of despair. Calculate Luca's declining health, calculate the escalating costs, calculate the vanishing chances. The numbers screamed, a cacophony of impending loss. There was no solution, no elegant equation to save him. Not in her world. Not anymore. She clutched the worn photo of Luca, his smile wide and mischievous, his eyes bright with a curiosity that had captivated everyone. That smile was her anchor, her torment. How could she let it fade? How could she surrender to the inevitable when a whisper of a chance, however dangerous, still lingered? The whisper had grown into a roar in the darkest hours of the night. The Obsidian Gamble. A name murmured in hushed tones, reserved for those who moved in circles of immense wealth and shadowy power. It was a clandestine poker tournament, an annual pilgrimage for the elite of the underworld, hosted on a private superyacht. The stakes were astronomical, the risks deadly. But so were Luca's medical bills. Serafina had discovered it by accident, a coded message in an old gambling forum, a desperate plea from another family ravaged by illness. She had followed the breadcrumbs, deciphering the cryptic invitations, her mathematical mind working furiously to break a code designed to be impenetrable. The thought of stepping into such a world of ruthless men and unforgiving odds, made her stomach churn. She was a quiet, bookish woman, a lover of logic and order, not a high-stakes player in a game where lives were mere chips. Yet Luca's fading breaths became her desperate currency. "Lady Luck," she whispered, testing the alias on her tongue. It felt foreign, a thin veil over the raw fear that consumed her. It was a lie, a prayer, a desperate plea to a fickle deity. She wasn't lucky. She was simply out of options. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She who relied on cold, hard data was now throwing herself at the mercy of chance, draped in a fabricated persona. The day of departure arrived with a chilling finality. Serafina stood on the docks, the salty air whipping around her, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of her anxiety. The superyacht, the siren's call, loomed before her, a monolith of gleaming white steel and tinted glass stretching endlessly across the murky waters. It was a creature of impossible luxury, a floating palace designed to impress and intimidate. Gold railings glinted in the dying afternoon sun, reflecting the nervous glints in the eyes of the other passengers, men and women who exuded an unsettling blend of wealth and danger. Their bespoke suits, their cold, assessing gazes, their hushed, authoritative voices, they were predators in a gilded cage. As she stepped onto the gangway, the polished mahogany groaned faintly under her sensible flats. A tall, impeccably dressed guard, his eyes as blank as obsidian, nodded curtly, allowing her passage. The air inside shifted, growing heavier, richer, laden with the scent of expensive cigars, rare-aged whiskey, and something else, a subtle undercurrent of ambition, greed, and silent threat. It was an intoxicating, terrifying blend. The interior of the siren's call was a symphony of opulence. Plush velvet carpet swallowed the sound of footsteps. Crystal chandeliers dripped like frozen tears from the high ceilings, casting a soft, deceptive glow over polished marble and dark, gleaming wood. Every surface screamed wealth. Every corner whispered secrets. But beneath the veneer of luxury, Serafina felt a prickling sense of unease. This wasn't a playground. It was a battleground disguised as paradise. There were no friendly faces, no casual laughter, only watchful eyes and calculating smiles. She found her way to the main gaming salon, the heart of the beast. The room hummed with a low, constant thrum of anticipation. The click of chips, the rustle of cards, the hushed murmurs of bets being placed. It was the music of ruin and triumph. The air was thick with tension, palpable enough to taste. At the center, like a grand altar, stood the main poker table, illuminated by a halo of light, drawing all eyes. The other tables fanned out, equally busy, equally intense. Serafina felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine, chilling her to the bone despite the warm, heavy air. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She scanned the faces around the tables, each one a mask of practiced indifference or predatory focus. These weren't amateur players. These were sharks, and she was a tiny, desperate fish. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of despair and flickering hope. Luca's face swam before her eyes, his innocent smile demanding her courage. She took a deep, shaky breath, the scent of fear mingling with the expensive cologne of the men around her. This was it, her last gamble, her only hope. The stakes weren't just money, they were life and death. And she, Lady Luck, a woman whose luck had long run out, was about to sit down at a table where only monsters thrived. She knew the moment she picked up her first hand, she would be utterly, irrevocably trapped. The silence of the room, once a low hum, now roared in her ears, a siren call to the abyss. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, the weight of Luca's existence pressing down on her, then opened them, steely and determined. The game had begun. The air in the high-stakes salon was a symphony of calculated breaths and barely suppressed tension. Serafina sat at the green felt table, the weight of Luca's fragile existence pressing down on her like the oppressive velvet drapes that adorned the yacht's walls. Her alias, Lady Luck, felt like a cruel joke, yet she clung to it, a flimsy shield against the predatory gazes that flickered around the table. The scent of expensive cigars, mingling with the metallic tang of unspoken greed, made her head swim, but she forced herself to focus, her senses honed to a razor's edge. Her mind, a whirring engine of mathematical precision, worked furiously. The cards, a river of possibilities, flowed across the felt. Each dealt hand, each discarded card, with a data point. She wasn't merely counting. She was seeing patterns, predicting probabilities with an almost supernatural clarity that had once been her academic gift, now repurposed for survival. The rhythmic thwack of the dealer's cards, the low murmur of bets, the subtle shift in a player's posture, every detail fed into swirl behind her eyes, probabilities forming intricate webs. Each card dealt a new variable in her desperate equation. She felt the rhythm of the deck, the flow of the game, a silent, intricate dance that few could master. This was her internal algorithm. This was her battlefield, her last stand for Luca. Across from her sat Mr. Jin, a man whose reputation for ruthless luck preceded him. His impeccably tailored silk suit shimmered under the chandeliers, and not about luck for Serafina, it was about pure, unadulterated calculation. Luca's gaunt face, his labored breaths, fueled her focus, sharpened her senses to an almost painful degree. Every chip she risked felt heavy gold watch gleamed on his wrist. His smile, when it appeared, was more of a baring of teeth, cold and dismissive. He played with an unsettling confidence, his chips stacked precariously high, almost mocking her own meager like a piece of his fragile future. Across from her sat Mr. Jin, a man whose reputation for ruthless play preceded him like a dark, noxious cloud. His smile was a thin, unpleasant slash across his face, his eyes like polished pile. Serafina watched his every move, his every tell, not just for the game, but for any sign of the desperation that fueled her own existence. The pot swelled, a monstrous beast devouring hope and fortune. Its stones, devoid of warmth or empathy. He wore a heavy gold watch, its gleam catching the light, an ostentatious display of wealth that grated on Serafina's raw nerves. As the dealer slid the final river card across was a no-limit Texas Hold'em round, and the stakes had escalated to a dizzying height. Serafina held a decent hand, but her gut, that primal instinct often overridden by logic, screamed caution. Her eyes drifted to Jin's discarded cards, then back to the new ones being dealt. That's when she saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible smudge, a microscopic raised line on the back of his latest card, the Queen of Hearts. The felt, Serafina's internal calculations screamed one thing, a bluff, but a perfect one. Too perfect. Her gaze, sharpened by desperation, swept over Jin's hand as he subtly adjusted his grip on the cards. It wasn't a manufacturer's defect. It was too precise, too subtle, almost brushed on with a wisp of dark powder. A marker. Her blood ran cold. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in and then she saw it. A minuscule imperfection. Not a smudge, not a fold, but a deliberately raised bump on the glossy back of the card, almost invisible unless you knew precisely where to look, precisely how the light might catch it. Her cage. Cheating. In this environment, it wasn't just bad sportsmanship. It was a declaration of war. And for her, it was a guarantee of losing, of Luca losing. The internal debate was instant, brutal. Stake, breath hitched. A car mechanic's mark. The cheat. The realization slammed into her, a cold, hard stone in her gut. She'd heard whispers of such things, but seeing it, knowing the sheer audacity of it in silence, lose gracefully and walk away with nothing, leaving Luca to his fate, or speak up, expose a dangerous man, and risk everything, her life, her future, perhaps even Luca's fragile peace. The image of Luca's a game of this magnitude made her blood run cold. Her mind reeled. Call him out? Here? Now. The stakes weren't just the pot. They were her stakes, Luca's life. X-Week's smile, the defiant spark in his eyes, solidified her resolve. She couldn't let them steal her only chance. Her voice, when it came, was a reedy whisper, barely audible over the clinking of chips. Posing a cheat in this world could be deadly. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down on her, whispering warnings. Her palms grew slick, a cold sweat breaking out on her forehead. But the image of Luca, pale and struggling, "There's a mark on your card, Mr. Gian." The hum of the room died. Every head snapped toward her, an army of sharp, incredulous gazes. The dealer, a man with practiced neutrality, froze. His flashed before her. She couldn't afford to lose this hand. She couldn't afford to participate in a rigged game that would siphon away her last hope. The anger, hot and righteous, began to eclipse the fear. This hand midair over the deck. Mr. Gian's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief that quickly contorted into a snarl. "What did you say?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. Stripped of its false wasn't just about money. It was about integrity, about the brutal unfairness of a world that relentlessly crushed the vulnerable. "Fold," one player muttered, throwing his cards in with a sigh. Another followed suit. Gian's civility. His eyes, suddenly devoid of warmth, were pinpricks of icy rage. Serafina swallowed, her throat suddenly dry as desert sand. Her hands, resting on the felt, trembled, but she forced herself to. Smirk widened, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Serafina's voice felt trapped in her throat, a small, fragile bird beating against bone. But she forced it out, her words cutting through the hushed tension meet his furious stare. "I said," she repeated, her voice gaining a surprising, defiant strength, "there's a mark on your Queen of Hearts." A very small one, on the upper left corner. Jin slammed like broken glass. "Mr. Jin," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts, "I believe your hand is compromised." The immediate silence was absolute, heavy enough to crack the air. Every eye in the lounge is hand on the table. The sound cracked through the silence like a whip. Chips scattered, some rolling, off the table and disappearing into the plush carpet. "You accuse me of cheating," he roared, his face purpling with barely contained, once focused on the cards, now snapped to her. Jin's face, which had been contorted in a sneer of triumph, froze, then slowly contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. His hand fury. "You, a little mouse, dare to accuse me?" His hand, large and menacing, shot across the table, grabbing her wrist with crushing force. His grip was an iron band, threatening to snap bone. "You have," resting on his stack of chips, clenched into a white-knuckled fist. "What did you say, girl?" His voice was a low snarl, laced with menace, a predatory growl that promised swift, unpleasant "no idea who you're dealing with, girl." Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Serafina's throat. Her breath hitched. She could feel the blood draining from her face, the throb in her wrist consequences. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, the festive opulence giving way to a raw, dangerous edge. Serafina felt a tremor run through her entire body, a primal instinct screaming at her to retract, to apologize, a vivid counterpoint to the terrifying silence of the room. The other players remained frozen, watching the spectacle with a morbid fascination, none daring to intervene. Her foolish bravery had painted a target on her back, clear and undeniable. This was to disappear. But the image of Luca, his future hanging by a thread, held her firm. "I said," she repeated, her voice gaining a surprising strength, "your cards are marked. The one you just picked up, ain't about cards anymore. It was about power, about dominance, about putting an uppity gambler back in her place." She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, a wave of despair washing over her. She had been so stupid. Ridge on the upper left corner. A classic mechanics mark. She pointed with a hand that now shook uncontrollably, but refused to falter. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Whispers erupted, quickly quelled by the icy glare of Jin's security detail. Burly men in dark suits, who had suddenly closed ranks around the table, their hands subtly moving towards their inner jackets. The threat was unspoken, but utterly palpable. Serafina was a lamb among. Luca. Just as despair threatened to consume her, a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the suffocating tension. It wasn't loud, but possessed an undeniable authority that silenced even Mr. Jin's furious huffing. "Is there a problem, Mr. Jin?" The words seemed to hang in the air, weighted with an unspoken command. Jin's grip on Serafina's wrist loosened, his head snapping towards the entrance to wolves, and she had just bared her teeth at the biggest one. Her blood pounded in her ears, a roaring torrent that threatened to drown out everything else. This was it. She had just signed her own death warrant. Just as Jin the salon. Serafina's eyes flew open. Framed in the arched doorway, cloaked in the subtle interplay of light and shadow, stood Dante Moretti. He was taller than she had imagined, a commanding figure whose presence began to rise, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. A new voice, deep and resonant, cut through the suffocating tension, an unexpected bomb of authority that paradoxically sent new shivers down Serafina's spine. His alone seemed to absorb all the oxygen from the room. His suit, a bespoke masterpiece of dark, expensive fabric, fit his broad shoulders and lean physique with dangerous precision. It wasn't flashy, but it screamed of power, of a quiet "there a problem, Mr. Jin." The words were spoken softly, almost casually, but they commanded immediate, absolute attention. Every head, including Jin's, snapped towards the shadowed entrance of the lounge. From the periphery of the opulent room, Dante Moretti emerged. His presence wasn't announced. It simply was. He wasn't a man who entered a room. He commanded it. He moved with a languid grace that belied the immense power radiating from him, unshakable confidence that needed no outward adornment. His dark hair, meticulously styled, framed a face that was starkly handsome, chiseled from stone. But it was his eyes that truly captivated and terrified her. They were chips of obsidian, ancient and unreadable, yet intensely focused, sweeping over the scene with an almost lazy arrogance that belied their sharp intelligence. He didn't move quickly, didn't rush. Each step was deliberate, measured. His custom-tailored suit, a midnight black that seemed to absorb the light, clung to his broad shoulders, hinting at formidable strength beneath the expensive fabric. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his jaw strong and chiseled, framed by a shadow of designer stubble. But it was his eyes that truly captivated, chips of obsidian, ancient and chillingly intelligent, that missed nothing, judged everything. There was no warmth, no frivolity, only an almost unnerving sense testament to a man who controlled every inch of his world. The air seemed to ripple around him, a palpable aura of immense power. He walked toward the table, and the other players, once frozen in passive observation, subtly shifted, creating a respectful, almost fearful distance. "Mr. Jin," Dante repeated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of inflection yet brimming with quiet menace. He reached the table, pausing directly behind Serafina. She could feel the heat radiating from him, of absolute control. He didn't stride, he flowed, his expensive Italian leather shoes making barely a whisper on the plush carpet. The security guards around Jian stiffened, then subtly shifted, their predatory stances softening into postures of deferential respect, the subtle scent of expensive cologne and something else, something primal and dangerous, like a wild, caged beast. Without looking at her, he casually rested a hand on the back of her chair, a gesture that was both possessive and subtly. Even Jian, for all his bluster, visibly recoiled, a flicker of something akin to fear in his usually unyielding gaze. Dante stopped a few feet from the table, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He didn't protective. Mr. Jian, now looking considerably smaller and paler, stammered, "Mr. Moretti, it's nothing. Just a misunderstanding." This woman, she made an accusation. Dante didn't have to raise his voice, or even his gaze, to assert his dominance. He was the undisputed king in this floating castle. With a gesture that was almost imperceptible, he extracted a small antique gold coin from his pocket, tossing acknowledged Jian's explanation. Instead, his gaze, cold and unwavering, finally settled on Serafina. It was a gaze that stripped away her facade, laying bare her fear, her desperation, her defiance. For a fleeting second, she felt it once, twice in air. The faint clink of the coin against his skin was the only sound in the cavernous room. It was an understated, yet utterly devastating display of his boundless wealth and the casual ease with which he wielded it. This wasn't merely money. It was lineage, power, and a quiet, brutal threat. "Perhaps," Dante said, his voice a low, gravelly timbre that vibrated with unspoken authority, utterly exposed, as if he could see the raw wound of Luca's illness pulsing within her. Her breath hitched, trapped in her lungs. He was overwhelmingly handsome, yes, but it was a beauty laced with peril, a silent promise of absolute control. Then, with a dismissive flick of his wrist, Dante produced something from his inner jacket pocket. It was a single antique gold coin, gleaming dully in the salon lights. He didn't slam it down. He merely knew game is in order. His obsidian eyes, cold and assessing, finally settled on Serafina. She felt their weight like a physical touch, pinning her in place. All the fear she had felt before, facing Jian, seemed trivial. Let it fall, a soft clink against the felt, right between Serafina and Mr. Jian. The coin itself was a work of art, intricate and ancient, but its message was brutally modern. It was a silent, compared to the profound, chilling awe that Dante Moretti inspired. She was no longer just a desperate gambler. She was a tiny, insignificant pawn caught between two colossal, dangerous forces. She had plunged into the abyss, but it seemed the abyss had just looked back, and its eyes were the color of midnight. The casino floor pulsed with a renewed, nervous energy. Mr. Jian, humiliated and seething, had been swiftly escorted away by his own formidable security detail, his dark suit vanishing into the murmuring crowd like a bad memory. The antique gold coin Dante Moretti had dropped still lay gleaming on the green felt, a silent, mocking testament to his power. Serafina, however, remained rooted to her seat, the phantom pressure of Jin's bruising grip still aching on her wrist. The scent of Dante's expensive cologne, now mingled with the lingering tension, filled her lungs, oddly comforting and utterly terrifying all at once. Dante hadn't moved. He simply stood behind her, a colossal shadow, his presence a living, breathing weight against her back. She could feel the subtle vibrations of his breath, the latent power thrumming beneath his tailored suit. His obsidian eyes, which had just silenced a room full of dangerous men, now rested on her, dissecting her, analyzing every tremor she fought to suppress. A keen eye, Lady Luck Dante's voice rumbled, low and dangerous, close enough for the sound to vibrate through the delicate bones of her skull. It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment. And a reckless tongue. Serafina swallowed, her throat dry. She wanted to snap back, to remind him that recklessness was born of desperation, that silence would have condemned her brother. But the words died before they reached her lips. This man, he wasn't someone you argued with. He was a force of nature, a predator at the apex of his world. You exposed a weakness, he continued, his tone devoid of emotion. In my house. Her blood ran cold. He was cheating, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. An inconvenience, Dante corrected, his voice hardening. Not an excuse. This tournament, it ensures certain alliances, certain understandings. You disrupted that. He paused, and Serafina felt his gaze bore into her. But you also revealed a vulnerability I hadn't accounted for. An amateur with a gift. Intriguing. The word, intriguing, was laced with something that made her skin prickle, a possessive curiosity that felt more like a threat than flattery. She was not a person to him. She was a puzzle, a variable he hadn't controlled. And Dante Moretti, she suspected, liked to control everything. He then moved, a silent, fluid motion that felt both sudden and inevitable. He didn't touch her, but his shadow fell over her, engulfing her completely. The game is suspended, he announced to the remaining players, his voice carrying effortlessly over the low murmur that had just begun to rebuild. You are dismissed. The yacht will disembark in 1 hour. A wave of disquiet swept through the salon. The players, masters of their own domains, were suddenly reduced to subordinates, their expensive facades cracking with frustration and thinly veiled fear. No one questioned him. They simply gathered their belongings, their movements swift and deferential. Serafina watched them go, a strange mix of relief and renewed panic churning in her stomach. Disembark. That meant she would be free to find a solution for Luca, to escape this gilded cage. Hope, a fragile, desperate thing, flickered. She rose, her legs unsteady, and tried to slip away, to melt into the stream of departing guests. But Dante was a wall, an immovable object. As she turned, his hand, surprisingly gentle yet firm, settled on her elbow, halting her progress. His touch was a jolt, an unexpected current that both warmed and chilled her. Not you, he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her, possessive and absolute. You stay. Her heart hammered. I need to go. My brother, I know about your brother, Dante cut in, his voice softer, but no less commanding. Luca, isn't it? Rare autoimmune disease. Mounting debts. Desperate measures. Each word was a punch, revealing the terrifying depth of his knowledge, his reach. He knew everything. She was utterly exposed. Terror, cold and absolute, gripped her. He wasn't just interested in her. He was interested in her weakness, her leverage. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, a velvet chain. We need to talk, he said, and the tone left no room for argument. In private. He led her through a labyrinth of hushed corridors, past ornate lounges and private dining rooms, until they reached a secluded elevator, guarded by 2 hulking men whose eyes were as lifeless as stone. The metallic scent of the yacht's machinery hummed beneath her feet, a constant low thrum against her heightened senses. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a sumptuous private suite, far more opulent than anything Serafina had seen on board. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, yet claustrophobic view of the endless, dark ocean. Just as the door clicked shut behind them, a chilling realization solidified in Serafina's mind. She hadn't escaped. She had merely exchanged one part of the trap for another. And the architect of this new cage was far more dangerous. "Sit," Dante commanded, gesturing to a plush, cream-colored sofa. He remained standing, radiating an almost suffocating authority. Serafina sank onto the soft cushions, her legs trembling. The silence stretched, heavy and tense, punctuated only by the distant lapping of waves against the hull. "Mr. Moretti," she began, her voice shaking, "I appreciate your intervention, but I need to leave. My brother's treatment is critical. I can't stay here." Dante merely watched her, his obsidian eyes unblinking. "You have nowhere to go, Serafina." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl that somehow amplified its menace. "Rossi knows about Luca. He knows you exposed Gian. He sees you as a loose end, or worse, a weapon to use against me." Her breath hitched. "Victor the Viper Rossi." The name was whispered in circles of fear, a legend of brutality. He threatened Luca? "He has already acted," Dante said, his gaze unwavering. "One of my junior crew members, a young man named Marco, tried to discreetly help you find a way off the yacht. He expressed sympathy for your predicament. He was found an hour ago, unconscious. A slip and fall accident. A cold, visceral dread seized Serafina. Marco, the kind-faced steward who had offered her a sympathetic glance. He was silenced. Because of her. Her stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. Rossi's reach was far, his methods brutal, and she had utterly misjudged the true depth of the danger. "You see," Dante continued, his voice chillingly calm, "the moment you opened your mouth, you became a part of my world. You became my problem. And I protect what's mine." The last words were not a statement of fact. They were a declaration of absolute, terrifying possession. Serafina stared at him, unable to breathe. "Protection," she whispered, the word tasting like ash. "This is a trap." "It is a choice," Dante countered, his jaw flexing, "between my trap and Rossi's grave. For both you and your brother." He walked to a polished mahogany bar, poured himself a glass of amber liquid, and turned back to her, his expression unyielding. "You will stay with me. On this yacht, for now. And then, at my estate. Your brother will be moved to a private facility, overseen by my own medical staff. The best money can buy. He will be safe." Hope, a dangerous, treacherous thing, pierced through her terror. Luca's safe. The thought was a potent drug. But the price. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice raw. Dante took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "For now," he said, his voice a silken thread of absolute authority, "you will exist. You will not try to escape. You will not communicate with anyone outside my direct knowledge. You will learn the rules of my world. And you will not, under any circumstances, question my decisions." He paused, his gaze hardening. "You are no longer Lady Luck, Serafina. You are mine." The words hung in the air, cold, stark, and irrevocably binding. She was exchanging one form of desperation for another, trading freedom for a gilded cage, her life for Lucas. She was trapped, completely and utterly, by the very man who promised her brother's salvation. And as his obsidian eyes held hers, a strange, terrifying fascination began to stir beneath the layers of her fear. She was his now. And the game, she realized with a shudder, had only just begun. The golden light of dawn, filtered through heavy, dark silk curtains, kissed Serafina's eyelids, coaxing her awake. For a fleeting second, the fear and the crushing weight of her reality were gone, replaced by a strange, unidentifiable comfort. Then the scent of fresh linen, subtly infused with it. Masculine, cedar and spice aroma permeated her senses. It was Dante. She was in his penthouse now, a sprawling glass-encased sanctuary high above Manhattan, a prisoner in a cage of unparalleled luxury. She opened her eyes to a room that screamed opulence. A king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, rich dark wood furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the waking city. It was a stark contrast to her own humble apartment, a world away from the sterile chill of Luca's hospital room. Yet, the lavishness felt more like a gilded trap than a haven. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant, almost imperceptible hum of the city below. She rose, her muscles stiff, and found a silken robe draped over a velvet armchair. It smelled faintly of him. A shiver, not entirely of revulsion, traced its way down her spine. Her own clothes, the worn jeans and simple top, had been neatly folded and placed in a drawer. She dressed in the robe, the unfamiliar fabric a soft caress against her skin, feeling utterly alien in this new, dangerous world. A soft knock at the door startled her. It wasn't Dante. A young woman, impeccably dressed in a crisp uniform, entered with a silver tray. A steaming cup of coffee, precisely how Serafina liked it, black, no sugar, and a plate of fresh pastries. "Mr. Moretti thought you might prefer to eat in your room this morning, Miss Serafina," the woman said, her voice soft and deferential. Serafina stared at the coffee. How did he know? How could he possibly know such a trivial detail about her? It was a small, almost insignificant act, yet it unnerved her more than a direct threat. It spoke of surveillance, a meticulous observation. He wasn't just protecting her, he was knowing her. Days bled into a blur of enforced routine. Serafina was free to roam the penthouse, but only within its glass walls. The security was absolute, omnipresent yet unseen. She saw Dante only at breakfast and dinner, and occasionally she'd catch a glimpse of him through the panoramic windows, a dark, commanding figure on a video call, his voice a low, steady rumble of authority. He was a creature of habit, she observed. His mornings began with a workout in his private gym, the rhythmic thud of weights resonating faintly through the thick walls. Then he would immerse himself in his work, a silent, intense whirlwind of calls, documents, and hushed conversations with his lieutenants. She'd watch him from a distance, fascinated and repulsed, as he navigated a world she could barely comprehend, a world built on power, influence, and unyielding control. His movements were precise, economical, every gesture loaded with intent. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary word. He was a finely honed weapon, always at the ready. One evening, during a silent dinner in the sprawling dining area overlooking the glittering city skyline, Serafina found herself studying him openly. He caught her gaze, his obsidian eyes holding hers. "Your brother," he said, his voice cutting through the elegant silence. "His condition is stable. The new medication regimen seems promising. The specialists believe he has a good chance at significant improvement." Relief, so potent it made her knees weak, flooded her. A choked sound escaped her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, the words raw with emotion. "Thank you, Dante." He merely inclined his head, a subtle gesture that was neither dismissive nor overtly kind. It was simply a confirmation of a duty fulfilled, a promise kept. But for Serafina, it was everything. It was the only reason she endured this gilded captivity. Her gratitude was a heavy chain, binding her to him as surely as any physical restraint. Yet, a fierce resentment still simmered beneath the surface. She was a bird in a cage, no matter how golden. She missed the freedom to walk the streets, to feel the anonymous bustle of the city, to make her own choices. One afternoon, she found herself at the expansive bookshelf in the living area, her fingers tracing the spines of ancient texts and modern thrillers. Dante entered, his presence a silent force. He merely watched her, then pulled a worn copy of The Art of War from a high shelf and placed it on the table near her. A subtle gesture, yet again. A suggestion. A lesson. A reminder of the world she was now inextricably linked to. "You should read it," he said, his voice flat. "It teaches strategy. Understanding your opponent is paramount." She picked up the book, its pages soft with age. "Is that what I am to you?" she asked, her voice tinged with a bitterness she couldn't hide. An opponent, his eyes, for a split second, softened, a fleeting glimpse of something almost unreadable before hardening again. "A valuable asset," he corrected, his voice a low rumble. "One I intend to keep safe and informed." He walked away, leaving her with the book, the weight of his words, and a confusing mix of anger and reluctant appreciation. The slow burn intensified in these quiet, charged moments. During one particularly late night, unable to sleep, Serafina found Dante in his study, hunched over his desk, bathed in the cool glow of multiple screens. He had shed his jacket, his dark shirt straining against the powerful muscles of his back and shoulders. The scent of coffee and paper filled the air. She watched him unseen for a long moment, observing the subtle tension in his jaw, the lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. He wasn't just a force. He was a man burdened by immense responsibility, navigating a world that demanded absolute ruthlessness. For the first time, she saw a flicker of the man beneath the impenetrable mask, a brief, startling glimpse of vulnerability. It unsettled her, softened a hard corner in her heart she hadn't known existed. He must have sensed her presence. Without looking up, he gestured to a large armchair by the window. "Couldn't sleep." Serafina hesitated, then walked over, sinking into the plush leather. "Too much quiet," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "And too much city." She looked out at the glittering expanse of Manhattan, a dizzying tapestry of light. "It's beautiful and terrifying." He turned, his face still in shadow, but his eyes, those piercing obsidian pools, met hers. "My world is both," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, a rare crack in his usual stoicism. "It is unforgiving, but it protects what it holds dear." His gaze lingered on her, an intensity that made her breath hitch. It felt like a confession, a promise, a warning, all at once. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken emotions. It wasn't kindness he offered, not precisely. It was a fierce, dangerous possessiveness, a claim. And Serafina, despite her fear, despite her lingering resentment, found herself drawn to it, to the undeniable strength of a man who held her fate and Lucas in his powerful hands. A dangerous seed of attraction, forbidden and terrifying, began to sprout in the fertile ground of her desperation. She knew it was madness, Stockholm syndrome of the soul, yet she couldn't deny the warmth, the strange sense of being seen that emanated from this dark, powerful man. She was a moth to his flame, mesmerized by the danger, desperate for the protection. And as his gaze held hers, she felt an undeniable pull, a magnetic force that promised both ruin and a peculiar, intoxicating salvation. The fragile rhythm of Serafina's gilded captivity had settled into a deceptive calm. Weeks had passed since her forced relocation to Dante's penthouse. Each day a delicate balance between the suffocating luxury and the crushing weight of her dependence. Luca, secured in a state-of-the-art medical wing under Dante's direct supervision, was showing slow, steady improvement. The regular reports, always delivered by one of Dante's inscrutable assistants, were the only anchors in her surreal new existence. The scent of clean sheets, the subtle hum of the penthouse's climate control, the panoramic views of Manhattan. These became her new normal, a terrifyingly beautiful cage. She spent her days haunting the penthouse's vast library, devouring books on economics, history, and even philosophy, anything to keep her mind from unraveling. The silence was often punctuated by the distant, muffled sounds of Dante's world, hushed phone calls from his study, the rhythmic thud-thud from his private gym, the quiet, almost spectral movements of his staff. She was safe, yes, but the safety felt conditional, a temporary reprieve. One crisp afternoon, a sense of unease, sharp and visceral, prickled at the back of her neck. It was irrational, a mere phantom of her anxiety, yet it clung to her like a shroud. She was engrossed in a particularly dense tome on geopolitical strategies, a book Dante had subtly left on her reading table, when the secure line in her room chirped, a soft, insistent melody. It was the nurse from Luca's facility. Miss Serafina? Luca's vital signs are excellent. He had a good night. The nurse's voice was bright, reassuring. Serafina's shoulders, which she hadn't realized were so tense, slumped with relief. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to breathe, truly breathe. The relief was shattered less than an hour later. Dante entered the library, his presence a sudden, jarring shift in the quiet space. He wasn't in his usual impeccably tailored suit, but rather a dark, open-collar shirt that somehow made him appear more raw, more dangerous. His jaw was set, a muscle ticking violently at his temple. His obsidian eyes, usually so controlled, burned with a cold, contained fury. The scent of his expensive cologne was sharper today, overlaid with something acrid, almost like ozone after a lightning strike. Serafina's heart leaped into her throat. Her blood ran cold. "Luca," she whispered, the name a desperate prayer. "Luca is fine." Dante clipped out, his voice a low growl that vibrated with barely suppressed violence. "For now." He stalked across the polished floor, his strides long and purposeful, and stopped directly in front of her. She instinctively recoiled, a primal fear seizing her. He didn't touch her, but the sheer force of his suppressed rage felt like a physical assault. "We had a visitor at the facility this morning," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "A new cleaner on the night shift. Applied just last week, impeccable references." His lip curled in a sneer of pure contempt. "One of Rossi's men. Clever. Almost too clever." Serafina's breath hitched. Her blood turned to ice. Rossi? At Luca's hospital? But how? He bribed a low-level administrator. Planted him. Dante's eyes, chips of black ice, narrowed to slits. The plan was simple. Access Luca's medical records. Perhaps even tamper with his foredrip. Not to kill him outright. Just to cause a sudden, inexplicable downturn. Enough to make you desperate. Enough to prove he could reach what was mine. The words struck Serafina like physical blows. Tamper with Luca's for. The image, vivid and horrifying, flashed in her mind. Her brother, already so vulnerable, succumbing to a silent, insidious threat. A wave of nausea washed over her, making the opulent room spin. Her legs threatened to give out. She gripped the edge of the heavy oak table, her knuckles white. He was apprehended. Dante continued, his voice devoid of a single tremor, before he could reach Luca's floor. "My people. They were thorough." The word thorough hung in the air, laden with unspoken brutality. Serafina didn't need details. She imagined the swift, decisive action, the merciless efficiency of men who operated in the shadows. A shiver, cold and uncontrollable, racked her body. "He tried to get to you, Serafina," Dante said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, his gaze piercing her with an almost savage intensity. "Through the one person you cannot live without. To break you. To get to me." Her fear solidified into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Rossi was playing a different game, a game of psychological warfare, using her deepest vulnerability as his weapon. He wasn't just after Dante, he was after her soul. Dante turned, walked to the grand window overlooking the bustling city, and pulled out his phone. His movements were precise, deliberate. He made a series of rapid-fire calls, his voice a low, commanding murmur, punctuated by clipped, foreign phrases. Serafina could only catch fragments, make an example, every detail public, no mercy. She watched him, a figure of terrifying, unyielding power, his back to her, yet his presence more palpable than ever. He wasn't just containing a threat, he was obliterating it. She saw the true face of his world now, stripped bare of its gilded veneer. It was brutal, unforgiving, and utterly ruthless. Yet in that ruthlessness, she also saw the fierce, unshakable strength that protected Luca. Her conflicting emotions tangled within her, horror at his methods, but an undeniable, desperate relief that he was her protector. After a final terse instruction, Dante ended the call. He turned slowly, his eyes still burning with that dangerous, cold fire. "Rossi will understand the message," he said, his voice a chilling monotone. He just lost a substantial portion of his network and one of his most trusted lieutenants. A warning shot for touching what's mine. His gaze landed on Serafina, sharp and possessive. Let this be clear, Serafina. No one threatens my property. No one touches my family. And you, make no mistake, are both. The declaration, stark and absolute, resonated through her very bones. She wasn't just a captive. She was a prized possession, a part of his domain. The shock of his words, the sheer audacity of his claim, warred with a strange, almost dizzying sense of security. He was terrifying, yes, but he was her terrifying. He would burn empires to protect her, to protect Luca. And in that terrifying, possessive certainty, Serafina felt a new, grudging kind of admiration, laced with a fear that tightened its grip even as she found herself clinging to his dangerous strength. She had seen the abyss, and Dante Moretti stood at its edge, a formidable, unyielding guardian. The aftershocks of Rossi's brazen attempt on Luca had settled, leaving behind a new, disquieting layer to Serafina's gilded cage. Dante's swift, brutal retaliation had been a terrifying display of power, a stark reminder of the abyss he inhabited. Yet, paradoxically, it also forged a strange, almost visceral sense of protection. She was terrified of him, but also terrifyingly safe with him. The chilling possessiveness in his declaration, no one threatens my property. No one touches my family. And you, make no mistake, are both echoed in her mind, a discordant melody of horror and a perverse, undeniable relief. She found herself watching him more closely, her fear now laced with an insistent, burgeoning curiosity. What kind of past created a man like Dante Moretti? What wounds lay beneath the impenetrable mask of control? He was not merely a monster. He was a monument forged by fire, and Serafina, despite herself, wanted to understand the flames. Days bled into a rhythm that felt both luxurious and suffocating. She continued her vigil in the library, though her eyes often strayed from the pages to the door, listening for the subtle shift in the penthouse's atmosphere that heralded Dante's return. One evening, after a particularly tense update on the ramifications of Dante's warning shot to Rossi, a conversation she'd overheard through the thin walls of his study, full of clipped, ruthless commands, Serafina found him in the penthouse's private observatory. The room was a breathtaking dome of glass, framing the glittering tapestry of Manhattan's night sky. Dante stood silhouetted against the urban sprawl, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his gaze fixed on a distant star. The air thrummed with a heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the city below. The scent of his expensive scotch mingled with his unique, subtle cologne, filling the expansive space. Dante, she began, her voice a little unsteady in the vast quiet. He didn't flinch, didn't move, but she felt his attention shift, a palpable weight. Why? He turned slowly, his obsidian eyes glinting in the dim light. Why what, Serafina? His voice was low, smooth, a dangerous current beneath its calm surface. Why all of this? She gestured vaguely at the opulent room, the city, the invisible network of power that hummed around them. Why live like this? Why demand so much, control so much? He took a slow sip of his drink. Control is survival, Serafina. In my world, lack of it is a death sentence. For me, for mine. But who are yours? She pressed, her courage building. Luca, yes. But what about before? Your family? What made you this way? A flicker, something sharp, almost pain, crossed his face, gone in an instant. It was the first crack she'd ever seen in his impenetrable facade. He walked to a plush leather armchair, sinking into it with an air of weary resignation she'd never witnessed. The ice in his eyes seemed to thaw, just a fraction. My mother was a light, he began, his voice surprisingly soft, distant, gentle. Unsuited for the world she found herself in, married to my father. He was a man of empire, as you understand. Demanding, unforgiving. His gaze drifted back to the cityscape. She tried to soften him, to bring light into our lives. She believed in beauty and art, in the idea that even in darkness, one could choose grace. Serafina held her breath, sensing the profound vulnerability in his tone. The image of a young Dante, watching his mother try to tame a titan, formed in her mind. When I was 15, he continued, his voice now lower, rougher, my father's rivals tried to make a statement. They targeted her. Not him. Her. It was brutal. Slow. Designed to break him. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping violently. He was broken, in a way. He avenged her, of course. Decimated them. But he lost something vital that day. And I watched it happen. A cold dread seeped into Serafina. The sheer unvarnished horror of what he was implying, the brutal reality of his childhood, twisted her stomach. You saw it, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. I saw what unchecked vulnerability costs. I saw what happens when you believe in grace in a world that only understands power. I swore that day I would never be weak, that nothing mine would ever be taken from me again, not by choice, not by force. The air in the observatory thickened, charged with the weight of his revelation. Serafina saw him then, not as a predatory force of nature, but as a man scarred, traumatized, and shaped by an unimaginable past. His ruthlessness was not innate evil, but a shield, a fortress built around the fragile core of a boy who watched his world burn. Her heart ached, a sudden, sharp pang of empathy. The monster was a man, and the man was wounded. I understand, she murmured, the words genuine. I understand what it feels like to lose everything, to be helpless. Her own voice was raw, trembling with remembered pain, to be at the mercy of others. That fear, it changes you. He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of recognition, a shared understanding in the depths of his eyes. Yes, he breathed, the single word a revelation. It does. The conversation deepened, weaving through the contours of their lives. She spoke of her parents, her childhood, the careful facade she'd maintained, the constant struggle to protect Luca. He listened, silent and unwavering, his gaze never leaving her. The lines blurred, thick and fast. Captor and captive dissolved, leaving two souls exposed, bound by shared trauma and an unexpected, profound connection. He rose slowly from the armchair, the movement deliberate, almost languid. He walked towards her, and Serafina's breath hitched. Her pulse quickened, a frantic drum against her ribs. He stopped inches from her, his towering presence engulfing her. The scent of him, clean and powerful, filled her senses. He reached out, his large hand brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle, yet electric. Her skin tingled where his fingers grazed it. His thumb traced the delicate curve of her jaw, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down her spine. Her gaze locked with his, lost in the swirling depths of his dark eyes. A raw, undeniable longing bloomed in her chest, hot and insistent. He leaned in, slowly, inexorably, his breath warm against her lips. Her eyes fluttered closed, anticipating, yearning. Her body hummed with a dizzying mix of fear and desperate want. The air crackled with a palpable tension, thick and suffocating. Then he stopped. His lips hovered a hair's breadth from hers, a silent, exquisite torment. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the subtle tremor in his hand still cradling her jaw. The moment stretched, taut and agonizing, pregnant with unspoken desires and tangled loyalties. He pulled back, just slightly, his thumb still caressing her skin. His voice was a low, husky rasp, barely audible. You are not her, Serafina. You are mine to protect. And I will burn the world down to keep you safe. The fragile true Serafina had struck with her gilded cage, shattered the moment Dante's lips hovered inches from hers, a silent promise left agonizingly unfulfilled. The confession of his past, the raw vulnerability he'd shown, had created a terrifying new nexus of emotions within her. Fear, yes, but also a burgeoning empathy, a bewildering loyalty, and a longing she dared not name. He was her captor, her protector, and in the space between them, a fragile, dangerous intimacy had taken root. That unkissed kiss was a constant hum beneath her skin, a whisper of what could be, and a stark reminder of the impossibility of it all. The following days were a blur of heightened awareness. Every fleeting glance, every shared silence felt charged. She found herself searching his eyes for echoes of that night, for confirmation of the connection she'd felt. He was as inscrutable as ever, yet a subtle shift in his demeanor towards her, a fractional softening, wasn't lost on Serafina. She felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. Then the world tilted. It began subtly, a creeping dread that seeped into the penthouse's oppressive luxury. First, an unusual report. One of Luca's night nurses, a kind older woman Serafina had grown to trust, had suddenly been transferred to a remote facility without explanation. Then, a series of hushed, intense phone calls Dante took in his study, his voice a low, guttural rumble that spoke of deep-seated fury. The air around him bristled with an almost predatory tension, far beyond the usual undercurrents of his dangerous world. He was visibly agitated, his jaw tight, his obsidian eyes scanning their surroundings with an unnerving vigilance. One rain-swept afternoon, as thunder grumbled ominously over Manhattan, a secure message pinged on the encrypted tablet Dante had given her for emergencies. The screen displayed a single, chilling photograph, a grainy overhead shot of a remote warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. Beneath it, a terse, anonymous message: "He's here. Rossi has him. Alone. If you want him alive, come. No guards. No calls. No Donne." Serafina's blood turned to ice. He's here. Not Luca, but him. Donne. A wave of nausea washed over her, making the opulent library spin. Her worst fear, the one that had begun to recede in the face of his protection, surged back with brutal force. Dante, the unyielding, formidable guardian, trapped, alone, vulnerable. The thought was unbearable. She pictured him, perhaps injured, at Rossi's mercy, and a primal scream died in her throat. Her mind raced, cycling through frantic possibilities. Rossi wouldn't dare confront Dante directly at the penthouse. This had to be a trap, allure. But the photo, it was so specific, so convincing. And the instruction, no Dante. This was a test, a calculated move to isolate her. If she ignored it, Dante might die. If she went, she risked everything. The hours that followed were an agonizing internal battle. She tried to reach Dante, but his personal line went straight to voicemail. His security detail, always ubiquitous, seemed conspicuously absent from the immediate vicinity of the penthouse. A gnawing suspicion began to take root. Had something already happened to them? Had Dante already been compromised? The image of his raw, vulnerable confession, the pain in his eyes when speaking of his mother, flashed before her. He was capable of being hurt. He was human, despite his terrifying power. The weight of the decision crushed her. She was terrified of leaving the penthouse, of stepping back into the brutal world she had fled. But the thought of Dante exposed and helpless because of her inaction was far more agonizing. Her newfound, confused loyalty warred with self-preservation, and loyalty won. He had protected Luca. Now it was her turn. With trembling hands, she penned a hasty note, tucking it beneath the heavy marble paperweight on Dante's desk. It was brief, cryptic. "I'm going to him. For Luca. For you. Don't follow." She knew it was a lie. She was going for Dante. But she couldn't risk him coming after her and falling into another trap. She slipped out of the penthouse complex, a ghost in the twilight, bypassing the usual security protocols by pretending she was a delivery courier using a prearranged temporary passcode Dante had once shown her for hypothetical emergencies, an emergency that now felt terrifyingly real. The chilly autumn air, sharp with the scent of impending rain and exhaust fumes, felt like a slap after the hermetic warmth of the penthouse. The city, usually a symphony of lights and sounds, now seemed a menacing, indifferent entity. She hailed a taxi, her heart hammering against her ribs, and gave the address of the warehouse district, her voice barely a whisper. The taxi driver, a grizzled man with weary eyes, glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed. "That's a rough part of town, miss. You sure you want to go there alone?" "I have to," she said, her voice strained. "It's urgent." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable, but drove on. Each mile that peeled away from the glittering skyline of Manhattan pulled her deeper into a landscape of crumbling brick and dark, narrow alleys. The rain began to fall, a cold, relentless drizzle that mirrored the icy dread creeping through her veins. The anonymity of the taxi, once a comfort, now felt like a shroud. She was utterly alone. When the taxi finally pulled up to the derelict warehouse, she saw it, the exact building from the photograph. It stood stark and imposing against the bruised twilight sky, its windows dark, its massive loading bay door a gaping maw of shadow. The area was deserted, eerily silent save for the drumming of rain on the metal roof and the distant wail of a police siren. A shiver, colder than the rain, ran down her spine. The air tasted metallic, like ozone before a storm. She paid the driver, who sped away with a backward glance, leaving her standing utterly exposed. The weight of her decision settled on her, heavy and cold. She was here. No turning back. Taking a shaky breath, she pushed open a smaller, unmarked side door that creaked ominously. The interior was a cavern of shadows, thick with the smell of damp concrete, rust, and something else, something sickly sweet, like drying blood. Her eyes struggled to adjust. A single, bare bulb flickered high above, casting grotesque shadows that danced like specters. A cold, hard knot formed in her stomach. This wasn't right. The silence was too profound, the air too still. Then a voice, slick and venomous, sliced through the oppressive quiet. Such a brave little bird. Serafina whirled, her heart leaping into her throat. From the deeper shadows emerged not Dante, but Lorenzo Rossi, his lean figure silhouetted against a distant sliver of light. He was flanked by two burly men, their faces obscured by the gloom. A cruel smile stretched across his lips, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "Rossi," she gasped, the name a choked whisper of despair. "Where is he? Where is Dante?" His laughter was a low, rasping sound that echoed through the vast space, devoid of humor. "Dante? Oh, he's safe, Karina. Tucked away in his penthouse, no doubt. Safe from the little lamb he thinks he owns." His eyes, glittering with malice, devoured her. "You thought he was here, didn't you? So predictable. So wonderfully human." The truth slammed into Serafina with the force of a physical blow. Trap. A meticulously crafted, agonizing trap. There was no Dante. No danger to him. Only her. Alone. Exposed. Her stomach churned. The raw, searing pain of betrayal, of being utterly duped, ripped through her. All her hopes, her burgeoning trust, shattered into a million pieces. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, tears blurring her vision. You lied. He didn't abandon me." Rossi chuckled, stepping closer, his expensive cologne doing little to mask the stench of deceit clinging to him. "Oh, he abandoned you, Tesoro. The moment he left you alone in his gilded cage, believing his protection was absolute. He failed. And now you pay the price." He snapped his fingers. Before Serafina could react, the two men were on her, their hands brutal and efficient. One clamped a hand over her mouth, muffling her desperate cry. The other roughly bound her wrists with zip ties, pulling them tight enough to bite into her skin. The cold metal of a gun pressed against her temple. Utter terror, raw and visceral, seized her. She thrashed, a wild, helpless animal caught in a snare, but their grip was unyielding. The sickly sweet smell in the air was suddenly overwhelming. Her mind screamed for Dante, for his ruthless strength, for the impenetrable fortress he'd built around her. But he wasn't coming. He didn't know. Or worse, he had abandoned her. The crushing isolation, the bitter taste of betrayal, mingled with the paralyzing fear for her own life and, more agonizingly, for Lucas. Rossi would use her. He would use her to destroy Dante, and Luca would be caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Dante paced like a caged predator. Serafina was gone. The note, terse and defiant, lay crumpled in his fist. I'm going to him. For Luca. For you. Don't follow. Rage, cold and absolute, ripped through him. He snarled, slamming his fist against the wall, the impact echoing through the vast space. The marble cracked. For Luca. For you. She believed he was in danger. She had left the safety of his home, of his protection, for him. Rossi, that snake. He had found a way to wound him through the one person he had sworn to keep safe. His communication lines were buzzing, his men frantically reporting her last known movements, the taxi, the obscure destination. Every passing minute without news was a fresh stab of agonizing fear. His private security details, the very best, were tearing through the city, but they were a step behind. He hadn't felt this level of raw, visceral terror since his mother's death. The failure was a brand, searing his flesh. He had promised. He had sworn nothing mine would ever be taken from him again. And now Serafina was gone, lured into the abyss by his enemy, believing she was saving him. Find her, he roared into his secure line, his voice a guttural growl that vibrated with barely contained violence. Every resource, every contact. Tear this city apart if you have to. If Rossi lays one hand on her, I will burn his entire world to ash. Slowly, his eyes, usually controlled chips of obsidian, blazed with a terrifying, unholy fire. And double Luca's protection. Triple it. No one gets near him. No one. He looked out at the glittering cityscape, the very empire he commanded, and felt utterly helpless. Serafina, so delicate, so defiant, was out there, alone, vulnerable, at the mercy of a monster. He had allowed this. He had failed her. Despair, sharp and agonizing, clawed at his throat. He would find her. He had to. For her. For Luca. And because, in the terrifying, possessive certainty of his heart, she was his. And nothing, no one, would take what was his. The blackest night had fallen for both of them. The stale, metallic air of Rossi's makeshift dungeon clung to Serafina like a shroud, each breath a painful reminder of her crushing betrayal. They had blindfolded her, bound her wrists and ankles, and left her in a small, windowless room reeking of damp earth and fear. Hours bled into an eternity of agonizing uncertainty. Her mind, once so focused on Luca's safety, now screamed for Dante. The image of his pained eyes, his rare vulnerability during their shared moment, twisted her gut. He hadn't abandoned her. He'd been tricked, just as she had. The realization that she had walked willingly into this trap, believing she was saving him, was a bitter, searing agony. Rossi, the Viper, had paid her a visit, his voice a silken lash, detailing his plans to use her to dismantle Dante's empire, piece by agonizing piece. He wanted to break Dante through her, just as Dante's father had been broken through his mother. Serafina listened, her blood running cold, her fear for herself warring with a fierce, defiant resolve. She would not be a pawn. She would not break. For Luca, and for the terrifying, possessive man who had, against all odds, become her protector. The sounds outside her makeshift cell were muffled, distant, heavy footsteps, hushed conversations, the rhythmic clang of metal. She strained her ears, desperate for any clue, any weakness she could exploit. Her wrists, chafed raw by the zip ties, ached with a dull throb. The blindfold pressed against her temples, deepening the suffocating darkness. She felt utterly alone, utterly helpless, but a tiny spark of defiance flickered within her. Dante will come. It was an irrational thought, a desperate hope, but it was all she had. Dante Moretti had never known such unbridled rage. It was a primal, consuming fire that seared through his veins, sharpening every sense, honing every instinct into a deadly weapon. His Serafina, was gone, lured away by a viper, believing he was in danger. The note, a testament to her fierce, misguided loyalty, was a wound that festered. Rossi had dared to touch what was his. Every asset, every network. "I want eyes on every corner of this city," he snarled into his comms unit, his voice a low, dangerous growl that promised retribution. His private jet, usually reserved for international flights, was prepped for a tactical assault. His penthouse control room, a fortress of technology and information, pulsed with frantic energy. Screens displayed real-time satellite imagery, traffic patterns, Rossi's known safe houses, and a rapidly narrowing search grid based on the taxi's last signal. "We have a confirmed location, boss," Luca's chief of security, a hulking ex-Special Forces operative named Kage, reported. "An abandoned industrial complex on the North River piers. High concentration of Rossi's known muscle. Looks like he's consolidating." Dante's eyes, chips of obsidian now molten with fury, narrowed. Consolidating. He's making a statement. A mistake. He slammed his hand on the console, making the entire unit vibrate. "Launch everything. Ground teams, air support. I want that complex surrounded. No one gets in, no one gets out. And no one touches her." His gaze shifted to a live drone feed displaying the derelict complex. "I'm going in. Boss, that's too risky." "Let us secure the perimeter first," Kage protested, but Dante was already moving, stripping off his impeccably tailored suit jacket, revealing the tactical vest and concealed weaponry beneath. "She thought she was saving me," Dante bit out, his voice laced with self-reproach and a terrifying possessiveness. "I will not let her face him alone." He was a force of nature unleashed. The drive to the North River piers was a blur of flashing lights and wailing sirens, his armored convoy slicing through Manhattan's traffic like a predatory shark. The city, usually under his silent dominion, now witnessed his wrath. As they approached the industrial complex, the sky above rumbled, not with thunder, but with a roar of Dante's private helicopters descending. Ground teams, a silent, deadly legion of heavily armed men, poured out of black SUVs, fanning out with practiced precision, securing every ingress and egress. The air crackled with anticipation, a cold, hard promise of violence. "Breach point secured, boss," a voice crackled in his earpiece. Dante gave no verbal command. He simply nodded, his jaw set in a grim line. With a silent hand gesture, his lead assault team moved. Explosives detonated with a deafening crump, blowing the massive loading bay doors inward, sending shrapnel flying. Smoke and dust billowed, momentarily obscuring the chaos. Dante moved like a phantom, a dark angel of vengeance. His movements were fluid, deadly efficient. The first men who appeared, Rossi's guards, were dispatched with brutal economic precision. A silenced pistol spat fire. 2 men dropped. A swift, bone-crushing strike with the butt of his rifle, another fell. He was not just fighting, he was obliterating. His rage was a torrent, fueling every bullet, every punch, every calculated step through the labyrinthine warehouse. The transition from the reeking darkness of Rossi's warehouse to the gilded warmth of Dante's penthouse was a dizzying blur for Serafina. She remembered the fierce strength of Dante's embrace, the raw tremor in his voice as he murmured reassurances, the subtle scent of his expensive cologne mixed with gun smoke that now, inexplicably, felt like home. She remembered being carried out, cradled against his chest as the chaos of his world unfolded around them, the hushed commands, the disciplined efficiency of his men, the distant wail of sirens quickly fading into the night. The moment they were back in the penthouse, the relentless adrenaline that had fueled her began to ebb, leaving her utterly drained. Dante, his face still etched with the grim lines of his recent fury, had personally overseen her care. He had gently stripped away her grimy clothes, his eyes meticulously scanning for any hidden injuries, his touch surprisingly tender. A hot bath infused with fragrant oils had washed away the grime and the lingering stench of fear, easing her aching muscles and the angry chafing on her wrists. He brought her a steaming cup of herbal tea, holding it to her lips himself, his gaze never leaving her. Physical wounds were minor, rope burns on her wrists, a bruised shoulder from her struggle, a few scrapes. But the emotional scars ran deeper. The betrayal, the crushing isolation, the raw terror of Rossi's twisted game, these would take longer to heal. She found solace in the quiet intimacy of Dante's presence. He rarely left her side in the days that followed, conducting his empire from a temporary setup in her library, his presence a constant, reassuring weight. He spoke little, but his silent vigilance was a balm. He would watch her as she slept or read, his gaze intense, possessive, yet now imbued with a tenderness that stole her breath. Luca's safety was the first, most urgent question on her lips when the fog of exhaustion began to lift. Dante had simply handed her an encrypted tablet showing a live feed of Luca's room, serene, lit, a nurse quietly checking his vitals. He is safe, Serafina. More secure than ever before. No one will ever get near him again. Not after this. The words were spoken with a quiet finality, a promise etched in stone. A profound wave of relief, so potent it brought tears to her eyes, washed over her. Luca was safe. As for Rossi, Dante's retribution had been swift and absolute. She hadn't asked for details. She didn't need to. The grim satisfaction in Dante's eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw, spoke volumes. She overheard fragments of conversations hushed and clipped between Dante and his lieutenants, every single asset, network dismantled, financial ruin. Make an example. There was no mercy, no second chances in Dante's world. And Serafina, in the quiet depths of her damaged soul, found a chilling, almost primal satisfaction in it. The Viper had paid, and paid dearly. Justice, in Dante Moretti's brutal universe, was a terrifying, beautiful thing. One evening, as twilight painted the Manhattan skyline in hues of bruised purple and gold, Serafina sat by the panoramic window, a cashmere blanket draped around her shoulders. Dante joined her, settling into the armchair beside her, his presence a warm, solid anchor. He reached out, taking her hand in his thumb gently caressing her still tender wrist, a silent apology for the pain she'd endured. "I failed you," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, his gaze fixed on the distant city lights. "I allowed you to be vulnerable. That will not happen again." Serafina turned her head, meeting his intense gaze. "You didn't fail me, Dante. I walked into it. I thought I was saving you." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a rare, breathtaking sight. "You did," he admitted, his thumb still tracing patterns on her skin. "You showed me a weakness I didn't know I had. The fear of losing you. It was a crippling." He looked at her then, his obsidian eyes burning with an unyielding intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. "You are not just my property, Serafina. You are my most precious possession. My weakness, my strength, my family." His grip tightened, possessive, absolute. "Let this be clear. My world is dangerous. Always. You have seen its true face. But you are now a part of it. Part of me. And I will burn empires. I will annihilate anyone who even thinks of threatening what is mine. No matter the cost. No matter the blood." The declaration, stark and absolute, resonated deep within her. The lingering shadows of his world would always be there, a constant reminder of the abyss. But looking at Dante, at the fierce devotion in his eyes, the unwavering strength in his touch, Serafina felt a profound sense of belonging. The terrifying longing she had tried to suppress now bloomed, untamed and undeniable. She was irrevocably intertwined with him, bound by fear, by shared trauma, and by a fierce, undeniable love born in the crucible of his dark world. She leaned into his touch, accepting their dangerous reality, accepting him completely. In his terrifying possessiveness, she had found her own kind of peace. The roar of the city outside Dante's penthouse had become a familiar lullaby, no longer a menacing cacophony, but the rhythmic heartbeat of the empire Serafina now shared. Months had unfolded since Rossi's downfall, months that had woven a new tapestry of their lives, intricate and irrevocably bound. The raw edges of trauma had softened, not vanished, but molded into a resilient core that defined their unique bond. Serafina moved through the vast, opulent spaces with a quiet confidence that was entirely her own. She no longer felt like a captive, but a partner, a formidable intellect by Dante's side. Her days were spent not haunting the library in gilded despair, but in the penthouse's dedicated office suite, meticulously poring over financial reports and strategic proposals for Dante's legitimate ventures. Her sharp mind, once focused on protecting Luca, now found a fierce satisfaction in optimizing supply chains, scrutinizing market trends, and identifying vulnerabilities in rival businesses. All within the legal parameters, of course, a subtle boundary Dante had learned to respect in her presence. She was building, not just surviving, and in doing so, she was carving out her own dominion within his. Luca, his recovery nothing short of miraculous under the watchful eyes of Dante's top medical teams, was thriving. He was still in a secure, discreet facility, but now it was more akin to a luxurious wellness retreat than a hospital. Serafina visited him daily, her heart swelling with gratitude as she watched him regain his strength, his laughter echoing through the private gardens. Dante often accompanied her, his towering presence a silent, unshakable guardian. Luca, once wary, now regarded Dante with a childlike trust, sensing the fierce, unwavering protection that surrounded them all. Dante had ensured Luca would have every opportunity, every comfort, a future free from the shadows that had once threatened to consume them. It was his unspoken promise, endlessly fulfilled. The public perception of Dante Moretti remained shrouded in layers of mystique and calculated fear, but in their private world, a profound transformation had taken root. One crisp evening, as they dined in the penthouse's expansive terrace, the glittering skyline spread before them like a king's ransom. Dante had simply reached across the elegant table, taking her hand. His touch was a familiar jolt, a current that still ran through her veins. "They say love softens a man," he murmured, his obsidian eyes, once cold and unyielding, now warm with an unspoken depth of emotion. "Perhaps. But it has made me sharper, Serafina. More ruthless. Because now, I have everything to protect." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a tender, possessive kiss to her palm. "You are my empire, my future, my everything, and I will ensure it remains forever untouched." It wasn't a traditional proposal. No ring, no grand public declaration. It was something far more potent, more fitting for their world, a quiet, absolute reaffirmation of his claim, his commitment, his devotion. And Serafina, her heart overflowing with a fierce, unwavering love, knew it was the only declaration she would ever need. Their family was unconventional, forged in the fires of darkness and danger, but it was undeniably theirs. On Sundays, Luca would sometimes join them in the penthouse, his laughter filling the vast spaces, chasing away the lingering echoes of past anxieties. They would eat meals together, simple yet intimate, Dante watching them both with an almost tangible satisfaction, his hand often resting on Serafina's back, a silent testament to his protective presence. The image of the three of them, within the impenetrable fortress of Dante's world, became the truest symbol of their peace. The shadows of Dante's empire would always loom, a constant reminder of the brutal undercurrents of their existence. But Serafina no longer feared them. She understood that their love, born in captivity, tempered by threats, and solidified by unwavering loyalty, was perhaps the strongest kind of all. It was a love that didn't seek to escape the darkness, but to master it, to thrive within its formidable embrace. As she lay beside Dante in the hushed intimacy of their bed, the city lights twinkling outside like scattered diamonds, she would sometimes trace the hard lines of his jaw, the scar that feathered his brow. He would pull her closer, his arms a familiar, comforting weight, her head tucked beneath his chin. She was safe, cherished, forever bound. And in the terrifying, beautiful darkness of their shared world, Serafina knew, with absolute certainty, that this was her happily ever after, enduring and unbreakable. Can love truly bloom in the heart of darkness, forge in fire and fear? Serafina's harrowing journey reminds us that our past wounds and desperate choices don't define our inherent worth. She found fierce courage in vulnerability, and in Dante's possessive, undeniable love, a healing that shattered every expectation. You are worthy of a love that fights for you, even when it looks terrifyingly absolute. If this story ignited a spark in your soul, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of dark devotion. Share your thoughts below. What does unbreakable love mean to you? Or simply comment, I am unbreakable.